gentleman from California, Mr. Garcia, is recognized for 5 minutes for question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today. And it's apparent that we're here today because our Republican colleagues are worried that it's too easy for the American people to bring legitimate claims against big corporations that poison and pollute our communities. And as they put it in their press release when they announced this hearing today, they're concerned that, quote, financiers are hijacking America's courtrooms. Now, I think my colleagues, of course, might be projecting. Big corporations, as we all know, are doing just fine. Meanwhile, Republicans are willfully ignoring the fact that wealthy conservative donors are lavishing gifts on the conservative justices of the Supreme Court. So if they want to talk about money in the court, let's talk about Justice Clarence Thomas and the many allegations of ethical lapses and conflicts of interest that came to light just a few months ago. So we're going to keep this simple. Now, first, I have a photo here. We see Justice Thomas with his very generous friend, Harlan Crow, who we've heard a lot about. We know that Crow is the conservative billionaire who has poured enormous amounts of money into Republican causes, funded right-wing advocacy organizations, including those, of course, run by Justice Thomas's wife, Ginny Thomas, who's had, of course, cases before the court. Now, some of these gifts that have been given to Crow by Thomas, let's list those. Justice Thomas regularly stays at Harlan Crow's private lakeside resort in New York, which I hear is very lovely. In 2017, Justice Thomas stayed at the resort with fellow guests from Verizon, the American Enterprise Institute, and PricewaterhouseCoopers, to name a few. In 2019, Justice Thomas flew on Harlan Crow's private jets and enjoyed 9 days of island hopping in Indonesia on Crow's 160-foot yacht, which I've never seen a yacht that large. I'm sure it's very lovely. It came with servants and private chefs. If Justice Thomas had actually chartered that yacht himself, it would have cost him $500,000. Now, Justice Thomas also accepted a $19,000 Bible that from Harlan Crow, of course, that once belonged to Frederick Douglass. And apparently, so this must be the same Bible that the justice is using to take away rights from women and gay people. Now, Harlan Crow's foundation also made a over $100,000 donation to Yale Law School for the Justice Thomas Portrait Fund. Now, Harlan Crow purchased Justice Thomas' family home and a property where Thomas's mother has lived rent-free. And Thomas Crow also paid the boarding school tuition of Thomas's grandnephew, Harlan Crow, valued at over $100,000. So the list, of course, goes on and on and on. And if this isn't corruption, I don't know what is. Now, Professor Clark, I want to thank you for your testimony today. How was Justice Thomas able to accept these lavish gifts? And how is it possible that a sitting Supreme Court justice can take so much without scrutiny?
Congressman Garcia, Supreme Court Justice Thomas has engaged in this practice of receiving these lavish gifts, as you outlined. And even more disturbing, in my view, is the fact that he failed to disclose those gifts, or many of them. And he has gotten away with failing to disclose until these gifts and other inaccuracies were discovered by journalists or other non-government organizations. So there is a lack.
And we are to assume that Justice Thomas is trying to keep these things hidden from the public. I mean, he did not disclose his gifts. Is that your assessment?
Yes, it is true that he did not disclose these gifts.
And so what he chose not to disclose was traveling on lavish large yachts, was being treated to the best food, was traveling in Indonesia, was getting $20,000 Bibles, was gifts to his favorite charities, and he chose to not disclose any of these information to the public. Is that correct?
Congressman Garcia, I believe that the Bible may have been included on one of his
good for him. That's good for him.
I think that everything else you mentioned, he did not disclose until called to account.
Absolutely. And of course, we know the issue, of course, is not just the gifts themselves, but it's actually the disclosure process. We also know another issue is that some of these gifts have had connections to cases that have been in front of the justice himself. And so these are with other business histories tied to Mr. Crow. Now, Republicans claim to be concerned with outside money influencing the legal system, but only when it hurts their corporate backers. When right-wing billionaires create conflicts of interest for the highest court in our country, they are completely silent. So I look forward to the many hearings that we have on Clarence Thomas and the justices and their illegal gifts that they're receiving and not disclosing. Now, this is what happens when we combine big money donors with weak judicial ethics rules. We must do more to bolster the integrity of the Supreme Court. I want to thank Ms. Clark for your work in these efforts. like all of us on our side of the aisle, we want to put the American people before corporations and put the Constitution above conflicts of interest. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields.